What's up, peeps? I am back for another video. We're continuing with the Back to the Future movies. We're on Back to the Future Part 2, which is one of my favorite ones. I used to, at one point, slightly like it above the first, just because of the future stuff. And it was, but I still really like it. It's a proper sequel. It does what a proper sequel should do. A sequel should always kind of escalate the situation. Like, the first movie was them having to go to 1955, and have to put their mom and Marty had to put his mom and dad together. Whereas this one, he doesn't just have to do that. He goes to the future, but he has to also basically change a potential dark future, which I kind of like. And honestly, the actor who played Biff did a really good job in this movie. He was Biff, but he played like multiple versions of himself. He was, the Biff from the beginning, basically the ending of the first one, and then he was old Biff in the future, and then he was Biff from the 50s. Like, he really did a good job. Like, that kind of character acting is really good. So I think he did a really good job. And when he was in the future, he actually played a really good villain. Like, because Biff in the first one, he's just a bumbling kind of bully. But in this one, he's like a fucking asshole. Like, you want him to fucking get his comeuppance. And I mean, there's a scene where he literally tries to kill Marty because it's revealed he shot Marty's father, George, which, and then that whole situation with Crispin Glover not coming back, because he didn't come back for this one or the third one. Unfortunately, I don't know the full story, but unfortunately, yeah, he didn't come back. But whoever they got to stand in for him in some of the scenes, granted, they were like far away shots, but like in the end, where like they're basically back at the first movie, which I really love. So that's some of my favorite parts of the movie, where they're basically doing the first movie, but it's like from a different perspective and different angles. I think that's done really well. It's what a sequel should be. And so basically the premise is we continue from where the first one leaves off. They travel to 2015 because Marty's kids and Jennifer's kids are basically going to become fuck-ups. And while they're there, Marty sees a sports almanac book, which basically has all the results for the Knicks up to 2000, and he figures he could take it and make money off of it, and he ends up buying it. But Doc disagrees with it and throws away, and old man Biff is able to take it, basically alters history to where Biff has killed George in 1973, Marty's dad, and then forces his mom to marry him. And basically Hill Valley becomes Hell Valley, which I thought that was really good. It was like a nice little dystopian kind of world. And Marty has to fix it. So they basically have to travel to 1955 because old man Biff told them about the almanac. And it's such a great continuation. And then the chemistry between Doc and Marty is still really good. Like, it's like a glove, they just go right back to it. But yeah, and the score is really good by Alan Silvestri. I mean, we all know his epic score in Predator, so it's just overall great score, great movie. This movie, I think, came out 89, so about 4 years later. So other than that, tomorrow I will finally review Devil's Advocate. That's a really good movie. I gotta give it to Keanu. He was able to hold his own with Al Pacino, even at that point, because this is still... I guess this is a side point before I finally get to the review. But, this is a Keanu pre-Matrix before he became like a really big name. So it's crazy to see him actually able to hold his own with like an Al Pacino, who even at that point has done already, obviously this is post Scarface, but he was about to do or had already done Heat, which is probably one of his greatest performances. So great movie. We'll talk about that more tomorrow, but yeah, so let's kick off his review. So the movie kicks off basically, like I said, from the beginning of the ending of the first movie, where we see the DeLorean basically. We hear the line like, "Where we're going, Marty, we don't need roads," and DeLorean becomes a flying car. They traveled to 2015, 30 years later, and Jennifer, because she's asking so much questions, Doc incapacitates her, like does some kind of thing that makes her fall asleep. Like some kind of like tech, because she's asking too many questions, and Doc's trying to make sure like you can't like meet each other, and then we finally see the world. So Doc does his own thing while Marty has to go to this Cafe 80s, which is probably one of my favorite scenes, and when I get to it, I'll definitely talk about it. But the overall, like, they did a really good job with, like, I mean, this was still at a time, you gotta remember, it's 1989 when this came out. So the future, everyone thought we were gonna have flying cars, hover stuff, but, for what they thought of 2015 would be, even though, it's 2022 now, we know 2015 was, but I think they did a good job of what they thought it would be. And the Jaws 2019 show was fucking great, because as big of a Jaws fan as I am. I mean, a lot of callbacks to Spielberg films, because, he executive produced this movie. He's involved with these movies, so. But, and so they did a really good job with the aesthetic of Hill Valley in the future. Some of the, like, special effects don't look great, but it's fine. It's, whatever. So Marty goes to Cafe 80s. We get Beat It out of nowhere. I didn't remember, like, because I hadn't watched this movie for, I think, like 3 or 4 years. And then I didn't remember they played Beat It, like, a couple of times in the movie, or at least in this scene. So Marty sees his son, who basically is kind of like Marty, but if he was kind of dumb. He gets picked on by Biff. And we see older Biff, and then we see young, basically future Biff. And we kind of get a little bit of, like, kind of the same scene, but they still did it their own way, though. It didn't feel like just a straight up copy, but, kind of played the same way. So Marty switches with him and basically plays as his son, and, bucks with Biff, kicks him in the nuts. He gets a hoverboard, and Biff and his gang chase him, and Biff nearly catches up with him because Marty gets in the water, because boards aren't, basically hoverboards don't work in the water. Gets off the board, and Biff and his gang crash into, like, a building, and history's already altered, because initially it was supposed to be Marty's son who gets arrested, but it ends up being Biff and his gang who get arrested. And I think they did a really good job, like, with some of the special effects, like, when, like, the history would change and the picture would change, because there's a couple of times where that would happen, where, like, they're looking at, like, a newspaper and the scene would change because of the history changing. And like I said, continuing on from the first one, they really did a good job of explaining the rules and establishing rules. This is why I say this series overall, especially the first one, but, like, I think overall the series too is the best in terms of time travel, because they explain it well. It has its rules. It sticks to it. It doesn't do some weird shit like fucking Endgame, or just even just any other bad time travel thing, where they just use it just to fix shit or something. But so Marty ends up, after the scuffle with the gang, he ends up buying the sports almanac because he thinks basically he can make money off the future. But he ends up meeting up with Doc, and then this is where they find Doc sees history changing in real time. But then he realizes Marty's trying to use the almanac book, so he basically takes it away from Marty, throws it away. But older Biff, who actually was seeing, like, he saw the DeLorean, because there's even a scene in the beginning where you actually see, like, when the DeLorean switches to the flying mode, old Biff at that point in time from the ending of the first one sees it. So you kind of get a continuation from that. I love the continuity in these movies. They just flow perfectly. Like, even with the multiple timelines that kind of end up happening, they end up, like, still making sense. I don't know how they were able to do this back then, but they can't do it in like 2019 or 18 when Endgame was shot. But anyway, um, so old Biff ends up finding the almanac, but while Doc and Marty are about to retrieve Jennifer, Jennifer is found by the future cops there, so they take her to Jennifer's house, but it's her future self, and basically they gotta try to stop her from seeing her future self, but or just future anything, because potentially it can kill her. But then I do really like this sequence where you are, and I think Jennifer, even though she's kind of more of a smaller role in this one, I really do like the scenes where she's like hiding out, and she sees like her future self, like how Marty ended up basically going to shit, and like how basically dysfunctional the family has become. So we do see, this is where we do see old George McFly, but if clearly a different actor, it's not Crispin Glover. But I do like the little stuff, like how there's even a scene where they make like this small pizza, and then they put it in this thing and it becomes like big. Like the little future scenes are probably my favorite scenes in the whole movie. But then Doc and Marty arrive in time while Jennifer tries to get out. She ends up seeing her future self, and they basically both pass out. Doc gets Jennifer, but while this is happening, old Biff steals the DeLorean and basically changes history, and it gets back just in time without them knowing. They get back in the DeLorean. They seemingly get back to 1985, but then this is where Marty realizes history has been changed, and Hill Valley's, because he ends up getting in a house, and it's a whole different family that lives in the fucking house now. So he ends up finding Biff's thing, and Biff's apartment, or Biff's palace, I think that's what it was called. And this is where he finds out that Biff, because he doesn't know that his father was murdered in this timeline, and that Biff married his mother, forced her to marry him, and basically he's his father. And I really think in this sequence, Biff is so fucking hateable. It's like a legitimate bad guy. Like, he actually felt like a real bad guy. Like, 'cause he had like his goons hold Marty, and like he beat him up. He, put his hands on Marty's mom. It just, like, he was a legitimate villain. He didn't feel like because even older Biff was just kind of basically just goofy. Because in the first movie, Biff is just an asshole bully. Yeah, up until he obviously almost raped Marty's mom, I would argue he was just an asshole bully, and even in this movie. But in this scene, he actually was a fucking legit bad guy. You're like, man, I want to kick this dude's ass. So he ends up threatening, because initially Marty's mom tries to threaten to leave him, but Biff basically threatens to cut off the family, because he's the financial owner. And then this is where Marty finds out about his father being murdered. So it's like, it's really dark. Like, you don't realize, like, a lot of these movies they seem kind of lighthearted, but man, especially this one is kind of dark. His father gets murdered. His mom is forced to marry this dude. It's pretty dark, honestly. So he communicates with Doc. He ends up going to Marty goes to his father's grave. This is where he meets up with Doc, and basically they got to try to fix it. And this is where they realize that older Biff gave Marty the sports almanac. So Marty confronts Biff because he basically reveals that he knows that he gave him the almanac. So this is where we get the backstory of how he got it. And then he tries to shoot Marty because, he's a witness. So Marty manages to escape. And so, because now they realize the point is they got to travel to 1955, basically back to the first movie, which when we get to this sequence of the movie, it's really fucking good, because seeing like different angles of the first movie, Marty following around Biff, You know, as if like it's like you get a different perspective of the first movie. It's almost like, I don't know, just really, I really like that sequence. So he falls around Marty. You know, Marty falls around Biff, but Biff, this is where we see the scene of older Biff, because Biff tries to force Marty's mom to ask him out. You know, ask her go to the dance, and then she says no. Gets kind of embarrassed. Then older Biff tells him about the almanac, and Marty ends up getting locked in the garage till the next night, where of the night of the dance. Marty leaves with Biff, and Biff goes to the party, or goes to the dance, and then basically Marty, throughout the film, is basically trying to steal the almanac, and every time he tries to get it, he almost something stops it. Biff gets the almanac taken, seemingly gets the almanac taken away by Principal Strickland. So Marty follows Principal Strickland to the to his office, where he finally gets it while Principal Strickland leaves, and it's not the almanac. It's like a magazine, like a porn, basically a porno magazine. And while he's outside, you see the Marty, the George McFly Biff fight from the first movie. So like from a different angle, it's done really well. They were actually able to do that really well. So Marty goes outside, or future Marty, anyway. While Biff is knocked out, steals the almanac, the real one, and goes to the dance, but he ends up running into Biff's gang. And then he runs into the dance. Biff's gang runs in there, and he sees Marty on stage, because this is from the first movie. So they try to go on stage, because they're basically going to wait for him to get off, and then they're basically going to beat him up. So Marty, future Marty, goes up on the top of the thing, drops some sandbags on him, and he ends up running into Biff, and he challenges Biff challenges him to a fight, and he's about to fight him, and then at that time Marty, I'm just gonna call him first movie Marty opens the door on him and knocks Marty out, and then Biff steals the almanac back, and basically Marty and Doc have to get back. They end up getting it back. One of the chase ensues, but Doc is able to help Marty just in time, and Biff crashes into manure again, and they end up burning the almanac, and then Doc ends up just leaving. And then basically this is where we get the setup for the third movie, where he gets a letter from Doc Brown in 1885. Basically sets up the third movie, which is going to be in the Midwest, not the Midwest, it's going to be set in like cowboy times. But it's a really good fucking movie. This one, but I really like 3. But Back to the Future Part 2 is a really good one. I would also give this one maybe I think I would give this one honestly a 10 too. I can't think of anything wrong with it. I think this one is what a sequel should do. You escalate the situation, but you still keep the core of it good, and I think they did a really good job with that. They expanded the lore, but they also kept it consistent with itself. The going back to the first movie is my favorite section of the movie, to be honest. And like the future, it's kind of like tied, because the future stuff was really good, but the way they were able to do like the different perspective of the first movie in a way, or at least like the final act of the first movie, like you even get to see Marty go in the DeLorean, and how they were able to successfully. There's even a scene, I should have mentioned it, where Doc talks to himself. That was really good, and because future Doc had to like obviously make sure to not see him, but the banter is really good. I really love this movie overall. The dynamic between Marty and Doc is still there, and it does, like I'm going to keep saying it, what a continuation should always do. So definitely a 10 out of 10, especially for a sequel. Definitely recommend it. There are people out there who do see it as better than the first. I can see why, but I still think the first one overall, the simplicity of it, and the fact that it's still ultimately, most people are still when we talk Back to the Future is mainly the first one. But I can see the argument for this one. So yeah, next Tuesday I'll be doing Back to the Future Part 3, which I can't wait for. I actually really like that one. I know a lot of people, it's very mixed. There's some people who don't like the Western setting at all, but I like it. I think it's a solid conclusion to a trilogy. But yeah. So tomorrow I will be doing Devil's Advocate. Like I said, Keanu Reeves was able to keep up with like the scenes he had with Al Pacino, like the way he was able to keep up with, especially because this wasn't like a fully established Keanu. He had he's obviously did the Bill and Ted movies. He had done Speed, but he wasn't like a major name actor until really The Matrix. So, but he was able to hang with Pacino, to be honest, especially in that final scene. And not Uma Thurman. It was Charlize Theron played his wife. I think she did a really good job of like obviously they were trying to portray her as crazy, but she did a good job of playing a chick who she started off kind of normal, but then progressively started going crazy. I think she did a really good job. It's all around great performance. It's not my usual type of movie I usually review, especially because it's like about a prosecutor and like that kind of stuff. But I still really think it's a well-made movie, and it's a Keanu movie, so I have to talk about it. But that'll be tomorrow. But I'm gonna cheers to Back to the Future Part 2, and then I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. But other than that, fuck Warner Brothers. Fuck Disney. Fuck LeBron. Fuck Colin Kaepernick. Fuck Seth Rogen. Fuck Kevin Smith. And fuck the Biden administration. I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. Peace.